A couple of slides at the beginning, which I probably can skip over pretty quickly, just to remind you all of the context of the cyber threat we deal with. These are all sort of from 2013 and before. Obviously, to that you can add things like the Target compromise in the US, the Sony Pictures incident end of last year, and then the hacking of the CENTCOM Twitter account a month or so back. Again, this is a slide that we've used particularly when we're talking with preaching to the unconverted, shall we say. So here I'm hoping that none of this is really necessary to sell to you the reasons why the cyber threat is something you need to be concerned about. Although just to reinforce that, I picked up a story that ran a couple of days ago in the trade press. About 2 reports came out this week from Blue Coat and Experian, just painting a bleak picture of UK firms' information security practices. Companies still don't have appropriate incident response plans or carry out appropriate risk and security assessments. So I reckon almost a third of UK businesses suffered a data breach last year. So this is still a significant issue, and that's obviously a third that know about it thus far. So why does it particularly matter to defence, which is obviously the sector I'm involved with? And when we talk about defence, we talk about the totality of what's sometimes called team defence, which is both the government side and the industry element to that equation. So for the industry side, well, it's the classic things which affect all private sector companies. So, your revenue, your profit, and your share price can all be affected by any compromise of your intellectual property, erosion of your competitive position, disruption of production, negative impact on your reputation, and so on. For the wider public sector, both defence and UK PLC, those same things matter. We are committed to the prosperity of the nation, prosperity of the UK economy, and any erosion of the private sector's the revenue, etc., on that side will have a knock-on effect more widely. From an MOD specific perspective, obviously we're particularly concerned about disruption to any domestic infrastructure, and particularly going forward, the potential erosion of military capability when it comes to be used in anger in the future in an operational theatre. And so in response to that, we had this situation where MOD announced that in response to concerns about that threat, that it wanted to work with industry to address this problem and to do that in a way that could be contractually implemented to ensure that it actually was realised. So we have this construct of the Defence Cyber Protection Partnership. Really important to emphasise the partnership element of that, because it has been an excellent example of working collaboratively, both government and industry, but also within the industry side. All of these 13 defence primes who are part of this come along, work collaboratively, are not interested in promoting their own self-interests. They are genuinely committed to improving the protection of the sector as a whole, and that's been really heartening to see. In addition to the primes, we've got 2 trade associations, ADS and Tech UK, representing the interests of the SME community. And alongside MOD, you can see CPNI, CSG, and Department for Business Innovation and Skills. And it's really useful for me having sort of following on from Chris earlier, because there's a linkage with the work that CERT UK do on CISP. And later this afternoon, you're hearing from Richard Batch from BIS, who will no doubt talk about the Cyber Essentials scheme, which they have been responsible for, and which you will see forms a core foundation of the work we have done on DCPP. So 3 focuses of the work we have done, or we have been doing. So one around information sharing, so reducing the window of opportunity for an adversary by enabling timely sharing of threat and vulnerability information between industry and government, between industry, and so on, following the CISP model very closely, and I will reference that again shortly. Development of measurements and standards, so capturing where the supply chain is at the moment, working out where it needs to be, and then plotting the journey between those 2 points. And then a general focus on raising supply chain awareness. So what is their understanding of the cyber threat? How do we address that? How do we raise that collective awareness, both of the threat and then latterly of the work that we specifically are doing within DCPP? So this is where we've got to thus far. So on information sharing, this was sort of established as a work stream in its own right within the DCPP, but very quickly became aware that the government were centrally doing something in the form of CISP, and in the interest of not duplicating any effort, we decided very much to harness our carriage to their horses and take advantage of what was already planned. Disadvantage for me of following Chris is that he is head of the CISP, has obviously got the more up-to-date figures, so my numbers on numbers of organisations and members are slightly lower than his, but I absolutely defer to the numbers he gave you. But it's a very positive state of affairs. And from our perspective, clearly, the important bit is that we as defence sector are contributing a significant number of those current members and are recognised along with the finance sector as punching above our weight, both in terms of membership, but the really important bit, because it's easy to join, the value is derived from when you actively participate, both by sharing information to the CISP and consuming and acting on the information that is made available to you. And as you can see from that final bullet, we're seeing real-life examples now where the sharing of threat information from one industry partner has allowed other partners to take action, put in place mitigations, and effectively nullify that same threat being realised on their networks. Jumping onto the supply chain awareness issue, so to date, we have been actively seeking opportunities to promote the message at events like this, at other trade associations, other conferences, other events, both here in the UK. We've also reached out internationally. We spoke at the NATO IA event, which takes place in Mons in Belgium in the autumn of each year. And we have also had some engagement over in the States, talking with their supply chain and their government representatives who are very keen to understand the work we're doing and obviously to learn the lessons. And particularly because in the defence sector, certainly at the prime level, most of our key suppliers are multinational companies. So the things that affect them in the UK affect them in the US as well. And then slightly more parochially, there are a number of sort of internal MOD and defence publications we have plugged into to obviously get that message out to our supply chain. And currently we've got a focused comms group stood up, because as we move towards implementation, we need to move from that sort of generic awareness to really targeted comms, talking to defence suppliers, as I say, explaining what is happening and how it will impact on them. So the measurements and standards, this has been the real sort of focus of our effort, and it's about developing an approach that we can use to implement in all contracts to find a way for suppliers to demonstrate to the MOD that they are adequately protecting their systems, our information and their information from the cyber threat. It's a three-part process, collectively known as the cybersecurity model. I'll come on to the detail of that on the next slide, but we've been through some piloting of that, working with both primes and SMEs to check that it's delivering what we anticipate. A set of cyber profiles have now been endorsed by a group called the Defence Suppliers Forum Executive Group, which is a government and sort of defence industry CEO level body. And we're now in a position where we have any day now, those profiles will be published on the gov.uk website. And the idea is that gives our supply chain early visibility of the things that MOD will be expecting them to do and which they will be contractually requiring them to do, albeit at a later stage this year. But to get that early heads up, this is what's coming, and they can start looking at that, positioning themselves, working out where they are, where they need to be, and starting the programme of work, if necessary, to close that delta. So I said cybersecurity model is what the collective name we give to our approach. It's a three-stage process. It starts with a risk assessment. So that is a series of questions worked through by the customer. So in all cases, that will always be the MOD, so the project management, the requirement management side of a contract. And through answering a set of questions, it produces a cyber risk level for that contract. There are 5 levels. They range from not applicable for the small number of contracts where there may genuinely be no cyber threat at all, through very low, low, moderate and high. Now, as well as being something that the MOD side will do, because a significant number of our contracts are quite large in size, and when awarded to a prime supplier, they will then subcontract elements of that contract. That mechanism will also be available to the prime to do that same process on the bit of the contract they wish to subcontract. And the reason for that is because we fully understand that the top level risk associated with a contract will not necessarily be appropriate to be applied to all sub-elements of it. So the idea is you do a risk assessment on just the bit that is being subcontracted, and you set an appropriate and proportionate risk level for that element of the contract. Therefore, your smaller subcontractor is not necessarily required to put in place the same measures that you as a prime are required, because the risk level will not necessarily be the same. There is then a set of cyber profiles. These set out the things that you need to do. So if your contract is assessed as being moderate cyber risk, there is a profile and it says you are expected to do these following things. Now, at the very low level, the only thing you are required to do is to achieve cyber essentials. So that's the BIS HMG-wide scheme, and this is where I was talking about we are building on the work they have already done. We're not reinventing the wheel. We're saying that's absolutely a really solid foundation. Do that and it's accepted. You will mitigate, I think, 80% of known attacks. Chris referenced the fact that a large number of the attacks they see would have been prevented by just implementing those 5 technical controls. It's really not significant. So if you do that, we're content. And then as the risk level rises, we're saying, do the cyber essentials, but here are some additional things we need you to do. And the reason we need you to do those is because defence is slightly different from the rest of government. It is subject to a more sophisticated threat from a different set of threat actors. And then final stage of the process, a supplier assurance questionnaire, which is the supplier's way to demonstrate to the department that it is adequately complying with the measures set out in the cyber profiles. So this is just to sort of set out the construct of how the controls work. So as you can see at very low, as I said, 5 technical controls, which are the cyber essentials. And then as you move up through the risk levels, there are 2 things that can happen. You can either have an additional control applied at a higher risk level, or you can have the same control with additional level of rigour attached to it. So you need to do the same thing, but to a slightly higher degree. And just to give you some specifics, these are the sorts of things that are included in the different profiles. So at low risk, these are some of the things you would be asked to do. At moderate, you need to do everything that's in low, and then obviously the additional measures that come at moderate, and so on. What this slide really captures, or aims to do, is just capture the totality of the risk picture that we're engaging with. So description of how the threat increases as you move up through the risk levels, the type of attacker and level of skill that they have, the controls that are in place, and then a broad description of the types of contracts that will be assigned each of those levels of risk. But it's really important, and this is our absolute caveat, that these are broad descriptions, but the ultimate arbiter will always be the risk assessment process, because there will be exceptions that prove the rule. Contracts which, because of the potential impact, is greater than would normally be associated with the type of contract service being provided, may attract a slightly higher risk level, and vice versa. There may be some cases where the level of information is particularly sensitive, but if it's completely paper-based, then clearly the risk of cyber threat is significantly reduced, and so we would not expect the same controls to be put in place. So what are we doing next? So we are, as I said, publishing version 1 of those cyber profiles any day now on gov.uk. Search for DCPP and it will pop up. It was submitted at the end of last week into the MOD Internet team, and then it just needs to go through the wider publication process. Slightly more sort of parochial again. The mechanism for then putting this out formally is publication as something called a defence standard. And apologies for you who don't have the joys of engaging with the MOD and our wonderful bureaucracy. But that will then become the contractual vehicle that we will be able to reference in contracts to determine compliance. And then we have a 3-stage implementation plan. So a startup phase, which we're sort of now into, then a ramp up, which follows once we've sort of ironed out those initial challenges, and then we move into wider deployment as this becomes effectively what will be business as usual. Not at the moment, because it's not something we do. But as you can see, we go from tens to hundreds and then into the thousands and beyond as we reach wider deployment. So what should you, this is a slide we use particularly for defence suppliers, and hopefully some of you out there, this may apply. So as I said, DCPP will be found on gov.uk shortly. HMG's 10 steps to cybersecurity is a good starting place for understanding other things you could be doing, and that applies whether you're a defence supplier or not. Cyber Essentials, again, I absolutely commend it. If you're a defence supplier, it will become, it's the foundation of what we're doing, so it will become a requirement. If you're dealing with government in any capacity, then it is now in the process of being mandated into most government contracts. And even if you don't deal with government, it is a really good thing to do. And the experience and feedback I've had from suppliers who've been through the process is that it's been really beneficial from them. And there is a small, I think it's around £300 charge for doing it, but it was described to me as the best £300 they had ever spent on information security. Echo Chris's point about the value in joining the CISP. It's a free resource. What is there not to gain from signing up and both consuming and contributing information where you can. If you are a small to medium enterprise, there is a voucher scheme that I think called the Technology Strategy Board runs, which does make available small amounts of funding to support you in improving your information security. So I would commend you to check that out and apply if it feels appropriate. And again, if you're a defence supplier, then the existing trade associations, Tech UK, ADS, or the prime suppliers are all there to provide additional information and support on this process. There we go. We didn't even get to the red.
Time for one question.
So we considered existing standards as a route to market. It was felt what ISO didn't do was give us sufficient flexibility to apply a proportionate model across the totality of the defence supply chain. That said, there is clearly overlap between the things that ISO requires you to do and what we will be asking you to do. We have done a mapping exercise to show the linkages between ISO elements and our question set. And as a minimum, we will share that mapping so that if you've done an ISO return, you can use that to quickly populate the return that we require. We are developing an automated tool to support both the risk assessment process and the questionnaire. And one of the options we will certainly explore in that process is, to be blunt, an early question which says, have you achieved ISO 27001? If the answer to that is yes, then effectively all those questions, it may be possible for those questions effectively to be taken out of the question set, and you only have to answer the additional ones above and beyond that, which already is covered in ISO. So there is a lot of overlap, and we certainly have borrowed heavily from that and the SANS Top 20 and other existing standards, but we felt nothing gave us everything we needed for our purposes.